Please join me in welcoming Debbie Sorkin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And well, thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some of the questions that you were thinking about in the session before lunch about maybe what systems leadership is, what complexity is, wicked issues. Anything that I don't answer or that you're interested in, please do ask, because I'd really like this to be a conversation and a dialogue rather than my just talking to you. But I did want to cover systems leadership, what I think it is, how I think it can help you, some examples from both theory and practice to draw on, and also just, well, how do you get started? What do you actually do? But I wanted to start, actually, somewhere else, somewhere not in the NHS, not in social care, not in any really public service at all. Do people know who this is? This is Laura Trott, as was, now Laura Kenny, an Olympic cyclist. This was just after she'd won one of her gold medals at the Rio Games. And I'm a bit sort of loath to use this photo now, what with all the shenanigans around British cycling. But I think the point still stands. I want to use this to make a particular point, that the improvements that British cycling, or in fact any elite Olympic sport, made over the past few years were not about just doing one thing and getting one thing suddenly right. They were about the accumulation of small marginal gains, doing lots and lots of small things, often very boring and low-tech things, right, making infinitesimal improvements, so changing the paint on a bicycle because it was marginally thinner than the paint they'd had before, and would therefore help them to go faster. And it was therefore that accumulation of marginal gains that enabled them to make progress. And the way I'd invite you to see systems leadership is about this. It's about making progress, steady progress, and accumulating gains. And even if you go backwards, you can still then go forwards and keep accumulating those gains. So it's about progress at the margins. And margins, not just in terms of limits, but think of it in terms of boundaries. So boundaries between, say, primary care and secondary care, between CCGs and trusts, boundaries between different sectors, so social care and the NHS and housing, or boundaries between departments within organisations, one department in a hospital as opposed to another department, or boundaries between geographies, really important for STPs. But above all, it is about how you lead when you are not in charge, and when all your great plans and intentions come up against those two things of other people and real life, and other people who have different priorities and perspectives, and sometimes even language to you. Language, especially incidentally, when they are using the same words. And you do not see it as their job to unite around your position. So just because you feel something, they don't necessarily feel the same way. So systems leadership is a great tool, I think, to have in your armoury when you're looking to convince people to think differently, when you're looking to get influence, when you're looking to get a seat at the table. Which is not to say that it's a magic bullet or a ray of sunshine. It doesn't come with money attached. I wish it did. But we've got enough evidence to know that it works. Over the past 3 or 4 years, there's been a National Systems Leadership Programme, which has been backed by the NHS, public health, local and national government, social care, and other sectors. And over time, it has built up enough evidence so that you're more likely than not now to hear it coming across different sectors. It's being seen as less of a nice to have and more of a must have. So for example, I think there's one person here from public health. Was one person down to come from public health? Anyway, in Public Health England last year, they did a review of the workforce, and they said, actually, you know what? everybody needs to know about systems leadership, because if you don't know about systems leadership, you're not going to be able to function adequately in your role. Local government, we've got somebody here from a local authority. One person, fantastic, thank you. Local government has been doing this for a while and is, I think, inherently used to dealing with lots and lots of different people and lots of different sectors. And the NHS increasingly is getting the message about this. So when it set out the guidance at the end of 2015, which was really set the guidelines for STPs, it was clear that systems leadership is needed, and it involves having open and iterative processes that involve lots and lots of different sectors. So I think it's really useful for you to have an idea, at least what I think systems leadership is, both so that you can use it, but also so that you can tell when the same language is being appropriated by somebody who is using it to push you in a particular direction. So this is like a warning as well. So I thought what we might do is spend the first probably about 40 minutes or so looking at complexity and wicked issues and something about what systems leadership is and how you work with wicked issues. And then thinking about drawing examples from research and practice as to really what works and what not to try as well. And then third half hour will probably be something around doing real work and how you actually make this work in practice. And I wanted just to flag up something that can be really useful, which is around framing and reframing, and to leave you with an exercise, not to do here, but maybe to try out with your teams as well. And at each stage there'll be an opportunity to reflect and discuss. But I do reiterate, please, if I'm not answering any of the questions that you had or there are points you want to raise, then just say. Does that sound okay? Okay. Right. I wanted to start by sort of taking a step back. Why systems leadership? Why now? Well, I think it's because it goes with the grain. It's because it goes with the reality that people are experiencing, by which I mean it goes with complexity. By complexity, I don't mean, oh, it's complicated. You can have things that are complicated, but actually you know what to do. So a heart transplant operation, for example, is complicated, it's risky, but it's been done before and people know what to do. There are tried and tested processes to actually do a successful heart transplant. A complex issue is one that is new. You don't know what to do. There's nothing you can reach for off the shelf that will tell you what to do. They're sometimes also called recalcitrant. And what that means is that you've got rubbish systems and rubbish processes, but everybody knows them and everybody's used to them, so everybody uses them. Sometimes with a complex issue, you can't tell where it begins or where it ends. Sometimes you can't even agree on what the issue actually is. The Leadership Centre at the moment is involved in trying to support improvements around A&E. Can systems around the country agree on what the issue is? Absolutely not. Some thinks it's GPs, to others it's flow within hospitals, to others it's social care. So a complex issue happens when sometimes you have to start by actually agreeing what the issue is. You're not going to be able to solve it. You can make progress. But when you do this, you're likely to come up with unintended consequences with which you then have to deal. And some of that is reflected, I think, already in the drawings on the walls. And why does this happen? Well, I think partly it's because of the nature of the issues themselves. They are absolutely multi-layered and deep-seated. We know that people's health and well-being generally isn't to do just with medical interventions. It's about having a job. It's about social connection. It's about having relationships and good housing and all the things that actually go to support a person's physical and mental well-being. Partly it is about the money, or lack of it, and you'll all be, I'm sure, very familiar with that, whichever part of the public service you come from. And when there's real lack of money and it really starts to bite, there's an awful tendency, and I don't know if you see this, to actually sort of go back and sort of constrict within yourself and say, actually, I'm not going to talk to other people. I'm just going to see how much money I can hold on to and what I can do with it. And partly also, I think it's the nature of the external environment and the difficulties that are sort of coming on us more and more as there is less and less money for public services. In this part of the world as well, there is something about trying to operate in a devolution environment and trying to separate the signal from the noise. There can be an awful lot of noise, but not very much signal. And when you're dealing with all of these things, it's really difficult. You know, it's really, really hard. And it keeps on being hard. It doesn't get any easier. You know, that's reflected in these things over here. Leadership is hard in these circumstances. And where it is hard, and it just keeps on being hard, and it doesn't seem to get any easier, there's an awful tendency, I think, to go back to a form of almost magical thinking. Oh, could somebody just take this away and just deal with it and write me a report or just find some money from somewhere and just deal with it? And this manifests itself, I think, in different ways. First of all, you get a reversion to default behaviours. I have heard the NHS described by people in the NHS as command and control without the control. But there is an awful tendency to revert to a wish to have control. And a lovely example of this, I think this was just last week, were the new standards in A&E. It's not just that you would have a GP in your A&E department, but no, you will have 2 GPs available and 1 clinical nurse and 1 healthcare support worker and 2 consulting rooms and a clinic room and no diagnostics. So all there. That's an attempt to maintain control when you actually don't have it, but it's something to watch for all the time. This reversion to default behaviours, that's what people know to do, so that's what they do. The other thing is a sort of a clinging to mantras, to buzzwords, because if we just have integration, it'll all be all right. If we just have an accountable care organisations, our problems will be solved. If we just have GRIP, everything will be fine. But integration, often seen in terms of structures. There's a huge, huge dependence on structures. If we just co-locate, everything will be fine. And I often liken this to if you've got a stolen car and you put the front half of the car together with the back half of the car and you think you've got a car, but you haven't, you've got a ringer. And it falls apart at that cultural weld because you've tried to do things with structures rather than in cultures and relationships. As Caroline was saying earlier today, that would actually lead to true integration. The third thing to watch for that's very, very common is a reversion to increasingly bizarre and obscure language. So you get things like this. Never say, there's new guidance out about how we can work together. Do say, leaders are being offered a framework to reboot strategic partnerships and change the culture of collaboration across council services. These are both, incidentally, from Twitter in the past hour, and they come from things that people have actually said at events or in promoting new guidelines. Don't say we need to get things done. Do say we need to assist in progressing the integration agenda. And my personal favourite, this is in the public domain as well, from another part of the forest. As you will read here, colleagues from across the county have been pushing forwards and making progress, but the further we travel, the more it becomes clear that there is a long way to go before we could claim to be an empathy engine. I swear, absolute black and white. I mean, what is an empathy engine? It's like a fire engine, you know, what? You sort of get what the person means. They're not trying to do anything bad. They're talking about we need to be closer to citizens and patients and really work together. But it's as if we need to put things in obscure language in order for them to have meaning. And I would suggest to you that all of these things, whether it's to do with language or mantras or default behaviours, they are really all forms of work avoidance. not doing the real work, not focusing on the real work. And I think the great thing about systems leadership is it says, enough already. We are going to focus on real work. We are going to take complexity as a given, and we are going to wrestle with it and actually work with it. I sometimes describe people working in any form of public service as it's like you're being asked to solve a Rubik's Cube whilst you're standing on a wobble board and being shouted at through a megaphone, all at the same time. And the great thing about systems leadership is I think that it gets you off the wobble board and onto solid ground. And it does this because of the way it's defined. Systems leadership is about the collaborative leadership of a network of people. So not an organisation, not a hierarchy, not a formal grouping, but a network of people who come together to create a shared endeavour, a shared ambition, something you really, really want to do. It might not be solving something very big or very major. Quite often it won't be. And you really have a common understanding of what that shared ambition is. And then you work on that shared ambition to get some real change. So some things follow from that. As Caroline was saying this morning, it is absolutely about relationships and the trust that follows from them. If you don't have the relationships, you need to take a step back and think about how you're going to build them before actually taking a step forward. And also, it's not about getting things right. It is about taking the scenic route where you need to. Much better to take a couple of steps, see where you are, and then decide what your next step should be, rather than herring off in pursuit of a strategy which you would find a change before you were halfway there. So absolutely, you can have partial and emergent and clumsy, really sort of put together solutions, and that's absolutely fine. But it is about relationships and it is about trust. There's a lovely line, it's not mine, systems move at the speed of trust. And it's absolutely borne out by our experience. Everywhere where we've seen it work, people have gone slow to go fast. They've built the relationships and they've built the trust. Everywhere that it's fallen over, they've thought they could do it without building the relationships first. So really think about this in terms of the relationships. I know it's reiterating what Caroline said, but it's absolutely the truth. A little bit about systems and a little bit then about leadership. Sometimes I ask people to describe their system, and they will talk in terms of their organisation and their organisation chart. And the thing about a chart is it's very clear, it's often very linear, everybody is in a box. You know, you have your name and your job title, and that is you. System is much more chaotic and much more kinetic. This was Richmond and the internet in 1992. Can you imagine how much more complex it is now? Note, however, that it's pretty stable. It's not sort of going off in all directions. Systems can be remarkably stable when they get going. But it is about an interconnected network and a complex whole. But it's that, I would argue, that is actually something that gives you room for manoeuvre. So don't worry about, oh God, I can't describe the whole system because it's complex. No one can. If anybody says to you that they can, they are fibbing. They are fibbing to you and they are fibbing to themselves. All you need to know or think about is your bit of the system and what you want to do. And also, if you're on the left-hand side and you want to talk to somebody up there on the right, you don't need to go via hierarchical routes. You can think, who else might do the heavy lifting for me? Who might my allies be here? Who might my coalition of the willing be? Who else can I talk to much, much more broadly? So think of a system as something that actually gives you room for manoeuvre and room for working, rather than something that, oh, it's complex, I can't engage with it. Another nice way of thinking of a system is of something living. Often people will think of systems in terms of governance. You know, these are our kind of rules of engagement. These are our policies. These are our terms of reference. And when you think of something in those terms, it's often quite static. You know, it's not something that moves or adapts. It's like those driverless cars in Birmingham last year that were trialled. They were fine, but they hadn't been introduced to the concept of buses. So when they saw these big things coming up to them, they thought, you know, computer says no, and they just crashed straight into them because they could not adapt. Think of a system as something that's inherently adaptable and that can actually change. System is much more about an identity that's built up through both connections that people have with each other, through the relationships and the trust that they build, and then the stories that they tell each other. I say stories, it sounds terribly woolly and fluffy, but it isn't. It's not just the anecdotes, but it's also the data, it's the examples that people bring, it's the experiences that people bring. All these things together form the idea of what a system is, how the system knows itself, what the system thinks it can do, what the system thinks it can't as well. So if you want to change a system, where you start is with the relationships and telling different stories that will actually make sense to people in the system, and they can then say, oh yes, I know why we're doing this, rather than, oh God, this is just something that's imposed from on high in this kind of giant Monty Python foot kind of a way. So it's really useful to see a system as a living thing. Now, lots of living things are nice. This is obviously to taste, but you get the idea. Can I ask you, what is your favourite animal, please? Please don't say tarantula.
Well, I'm not an animal.
All right.
I wouldn't mind
A tortoise, yes, a lovely tortoise. However, not all living things are nice, and some of them really are out to kill you, metaphorically, possibly even literally, but certainly metaphorically. So systems aren't necessarily neutral. There are a couple of evolutionary biologists who've done some work on this. And the way they describe it is you can see a system as a bit like an amoeba. It doesn't necessarily have much of a controlling brain, but it can feed, it can reproduce, it can get around, and it is perfectly adapted to its environment. You come along, you want to bring in change for really, really good reasons. You know, better services, lower cost, absolutely the right thing to do. The natural response of the system is not to say, that's a fantastic idea, let's introduce that first of all. No, the natural response is to kill it, because you are threatening their identity, their survival, their view of themselves, their whatever it is. People often don't fear change, they fear loss. So if you're getting this kind of response, this may be why. Quite commonly you'll get things like, that's a really good idea, I'd love to meet with you to talk about it. I've got a space in 3 months' time in my diary at about 11:30 at night, could you possibly make that? 5 months, incidentally, is the record that I've had, but if you've got longer, please do let me know. The other thing to watch out for is governance, the G word. Governance is like domestos. It can kill any initiative stone dead. I'm not saying don't have good governance, obviously, good governance. But if you get it at the wrong time, if when you just put an idea forward, the automatic response is, that's really interesting, can you tell me the terms of reference? You know, or who's on the steering group? You know, that is kiss of death. It's because people are feeling fearful and scared, and therefore you need the relationship so you can actually get to the bottom of what they're scared of and see if there's a way of actually working with it, rather than just trying to ignore it or thinking, I'm not sure, why aren't these people being sensible? They're so irrational, these people. Can't they see how sensible this is? This might be what's going on. And the key thing is to keep going. Caroline again was saying this morning about perseverance. If the organism is held perturbed for sufficient time, it adapts to the new condition. It's hard work. It will take longer than you think, so don't do this alone. Have your coalition of the willing. But keep going, and you will eventually get some change to the environment. Little bit about leadership in this context. Leadership is not your job title. It's not about being chief executive or director or lead or having letters after your name. Leadership is about the way you behave in everyday situations, and therefore it's for everybody. You can be an apprentice, you can be a matron, you can be a consultant, it doesn't matter where you are in the system, you can do something about your own leadership behaviours and address poor practice where you see it elsewhere. And it enables you to lead across health and social care and housing and pretty much any other sector. And I always say there are lots of tools that have been drawn up with public money and are freely available. Pilfer these absolutely relentlessly. They are out there and they're free. And I just wanted to flag up one. There is one of obviously developing people in improving care, which has just been developed by NHS England and NHS Improvement. But this is useful. This is the as well. This is the Leadership Qualities Framework for Adult Social Care. And what it does is describe leadership in plain English for people working in junior and middle and senior levels for really, really practical things. How do you manage people? How do you manage services? How do you build relationships? How do you actually get a strategy together and implement it? You don't need to follow any of these things slavishly, but they're worth looking at to think how you might actually take leadership ideas that you're already developing from them. So, and you don't need to be a systems leader all the time, which is great, because it's actually really hard work. Has anyone come across the work of Keith Grint at all? I'm familiar with him. He's a leadership and management thinker. He's based at Warwick University. And he has usefully developed descriptions of different kinds of leadership. So sometimes, if you've got a crisis, it's absolutely fine to take command. You know, doctors will sometimes say, if somebody's having a heart attack, if I'm having a heart attack, I want someone to take command. I don't want a focus group. That's fine. If you've got an emergency, you don't have time for discussion and dissent. This photo is taken in the London bombings of 2007. I got slightly caught up in that. About a week later, I was walking up Bond Street, and this young guy came tearing round the corner, really top speed, and I sort of stood back a bit. And then about 5 seconds later, it must have been, this policeman, armed, also came tearing round the corner. And he said one word. He said, move. I did not say, could we have a committee on that? Could we have a focus group? No. If you've got an emergency, it's absolutely fine to take command. The problem is when you try and be a commander for everything and for complex situations. And you end up like Dame Julie Moores in Birmingham saying, well, I can't get anyone to take a decision. Why is this? Well, Dame Julie, it's because they're all waiting for you to take command. So this is great for an emergency, but not great for complex situations. At the other end of the scale, sometimes you just know what to do. You've done it before. What you need to do is to manage. Oops. Where you need systems leadership is where you've got a complex issue, a wicked issue, one that's new, you don't know what to do, there's no easy start or end point, and uncertainty and volatility and ambiguity are there all the time, and they're just a given. And the job of leadership there is not to provide answers, it's to ask questions. And that's really counterintuitive for people who have made their entire careers from providing answers, but it's really what you need to do. Just wanted to finish this bit by just giving you some ideas of what not to do, or what to try and avoid, or to notice when they're happening. 4 things not to do when you've got a wicked issue. Firstly, try not to sack people as a default behaviour. This is quite common, not just in the NHS, but in other public services. This was taken from Haringey Council. It was shortly after the Baby P case. They'd had something similar again. And you had the reporter outside Haringey Council saying, well, they told us that it was going to get better, and this happened again. And then you get the guy back in the studio saying, has anybody offered their resignation yet? What happens when you get sacking as default behaviours? What happens to people in an organisation? What's been... Blame, absolutely. And fear and people not taking risks or doing things differently. So not even doing what they could be doing because they're too scared. Similarly, do not, as far as you can, revert to a blame culture. This is my favourite slide of all time, I think. You've made a mistake. Will it show? Yes. Can you hide it? Yes. Conceal it before somebody else finds out. Problem avoided. Will it show? Yes. Can you hide it? No. Can you blame someone else? Yes. Get in first with your version of events. Problem avoided. Again, if you've got a blame culture, you probably haven't got a learning culture. And you've probably got quite a fearful culture. And the NHS trying to get away from this culture and much more towards the kind of learning culture you get in airlines is fighting against this, not just internally, but externally. The very day that the Patient Safety Investigation Branch was launched, I don't know if everybody can read it, but this was the headline in the Times: "Blundering doctors get protection from blame." Not about what are we actually learning here. You wouldn't get blundering pilots get protection from blame. So there's something about this is a really deep-seated cultural thing right across public services. Anything you can do to push back against it is really valuable. As a corollary, don't pretend everything's wonderful or a success or a challenge. Can we stop using the word challenge unless it's preceded by the word university, please? There is a lovely phrase, Prozac leadership, where you've got an unremittingly positive approach. So, for example, Essex isn't a failure regime anymore, it's a success regime. The people who tend to believe this are the people at the top of organisations, and it often comes as a great shock to them when suddenly they have to realise that things aren't as rosy as they believed. So again, anything you can do to push back and get that sense of reality is really, really valuable. There's a writer called Meg Wheatley, and she says that the job of leaders and leadership is to create islands of sanity. And this is about creating those islands of sanity and pushing back against the unreality, whether it's unremitting need for success or unremitting need for progress. And don't put things in the wrong box. If you've got a fair amount of certainty and a fair amount of agreement, you can actually manage. You can use the processes that you already have. If you haven't got either of those things, you've got a complex and wicked issue. Put it in the yellow circle. Say yes to the mess. Amplify the differences and the difficulties and the problems, and reframe the issues and get the questions out. Some of the big problems, I think, happen where people try and put yellow circle issues into the blue box. Can you just write me this report? You will know if you're in that kind of situation because you will spend an awful lot of time in really useless meetings that go nowhere. And some people can have careers doing this. So you may want to do that. But if you don't want to do that, say yes to the mess. And when you've got a wicked issue, say so. So that is a kind of a whistle-stop tour through systems leadership and wicked issues. First of all, did it answer the questions that you had around definitions of systems leadership, wicked issues, complexity, those kinds of things? Is there anything that you had from your questions that hasn't been answered from that, or that you'd like some clarity on? That's all right. Right. In that case, could we spend 10 minutes, please, on tables, just thinking about what are your wicked issues? Because I bet you'll have loads. I bet you'll all have loads and loads of wicked issues. So what are yours? What are the behaviours that you see going with them? And who around you puts things in the wrong box and what happens as a result? If we just spend 10 minutes on that and then we'll come back. Thank you. But ladies and gentlemen, can I call us back, please? You can always tell when things are getting really, really interesting because the heads go down and people, you're obviously sort of really involved in this, or the hands start going like this as people want to sort of explain their system. I don't want to do death by feedback at any stage. But I wondered if there was any of the tables wanted, or people on them wanted to just share anything that they were talking about, or any sort of overall issues or things that have just occurred to you. So if anybody wants to start, and we'll try and capture some of these and maybe sort of feed them into the rest of the day. Yep. Mm-hmm.
We were talking a bit about the Transforming Care programme and Winterbourne View. You had the slide up with the blue box and the
yellow circle,
And
yes.
I often feel at the moment that we're very much, there's been lots of meetings going along, but there's no decisions. So it's very much, there's no one to lead the system. So you get an awful lot of meetings with doing it almost as ordinary management, and nothing's happening. So without anyone to lead the system, we could be here in 5 years' time.
You will be here. Yes.
So that's what we were talking about, and then we talk a bit around, actually, what are the objectives of Winterbourne? Is it to, or Transform Care? Is it to get people out of institutions into an unsuitable community setting, or is it to try to support people as needed? So it's effectively it's trying to. I don't know if I'm using technology.
No, that's all right.
Is it almost reframing what what the requirement is?
Absolutely, and it's having people, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but it's about reframing, and it is about having, whether you call people citizens or patients or service users, but absolutely at the centre of this. Not people who are seen as some sort of adjunct or some sort of data set, but absolutely at the heart of this. And things coming out.
I think the other thing that we're in danger of, which is kind of going along a little bit with what you were saying, many of us in the room have been working for the NHS for many years, and I think we've all seen so many different themes and new programmes and buzzwords and all sorts of things coming through. And really, I mean, we all know that unless there is absolutely radical change, like the whole approach and the whole concept of what the National Health Service can provide in this country, until that is an understanding, then really we are going to be here in 5 years and 10 years' time, putting out another kind of buzzword, another sort of transforming a care, or I should try and recollect all the things that I've heard throughout my career of each thing that's going to be the thing that changes everything.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Coming back to having, what is it now?
Yeah.
Nurses associate.
Yeah.
So now you sound very much like the enrolling nurses, which we used to have. It's like the
Absolutely.
Better First initiative, that's going back to
Absolutely, yeah.
how it used to be in
Yes.
midnight. I mean, what woman wouldn't want to be looked after like that?
No.
How we actually do it.
It's that sense, I think, always of what are we actually learning here, and that we apply, rather than just saying, right, we've tried that, we've had a pilot, we've tried that, and now we're going to do something else. Because again, that breeds its own culture, so that people get used to waiting for the next 5-year forward view, the next STPs, the next whatever it is going to be. And you can see people sitting in meetings thinking, well, I'll just sort of play with the system, and I'll just do what I have to do, and then I'll wait for the next thing to come along.
Cycle with no cycle. The plan these things, and when they get to act, they go,
No. Yes. Your actual do is to do another iteration of it. Yes.
We did go around in circles, like you were just saying, now talking about, this is a shortage of radiologists, lowering it from a degree to a DCR again, and using assistant practitioners and trying to bring them round with different qualifications to fill the gaps, which is basically what we had in the beginning. We used to have radiographers and telephone technicians, and it's just a different title for the same job, and then you're meant to be excited because this is the new plan.
And
Progress.
And therefore, I think building on that, the way I describe systems leadership to people is this is something that I think can give you a bit of room for manoeuvre to actually create your own longer term reality. Because the people who have been in the NHS for many years and are going to be in the place for many years as well and have a real commitment to this, I think you're better than some people who are just, you know, the recipients of the latest, whatever it happens to be, by someone who does not know your own patch as well as you do. So the question for me is how we can use systems leadership to give you that bit of room to actually do something longer term, and that will actually do something better for patients and service users than just they're being seen as kind of adjuncts to a system or to an initiative. So,
The other thing for system leadership is it takes time to build relationships and trust, and sometimes it can be seen as no action because of the time it takes to build that system.
yes,
if you like.
yes.
And that can be quite difficult and a really wicked issue. It can be seen as non-performance as
Yeah,
well.
yes,
So you're being measured on outcomes on a
yes,
quarterly basis.
yes, yeah. Absolutely, and the question that, or the way we always frame it, I think, is what do you need to do to feed the beast, and what do you need to do, if it is going to be different, to actually build the service for the long term. Something I forgot to mention earlier, I'm sorry, is if you think of using the question, what do we want services to be like for people in our place, as your kind of guiding question, not how much money have we got, oh God, they've all gone and taken it away. What do we want? No, seriously, what do we want to do here? What do we want services to be like for people in our place? Can be people generally, older people, people with disabilities, children, it doesn't matter. What do we want to do here, and how can we take back some agency here? Because nobody, whatever their sector, just wants to be the people who are just forever at the beck and call of whatever idea somebody in Richmond House happens to have on a particular Thursday. You've got a much better sense, I will guess, of what is happening on your patch and what is good for the people on your patch. It's not to say you won't get to the money. Everybody gets to the money eventually. It's not going to go away. But if you ask that question, I think it allows for a longer time frame and a more sense of personal agency and a sense of what can we really do here. And if you have that, then you can think about, well, how do the different initiatives play into that and what I want to do, rather than I have to just follow this and follow this and follow this till you lose track. This is probably a longer session, but first of all, thank you very much for that. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Because I think a lot of these will lead into the later sessions as well. Wanted to move on, though, just to talk a bit about, okay, what do you do? What do we know works? What do we know also doesn't work? Oops. There's an awful lot of learning. We know quite a bit. There's been a programme, as I mentioned, for about the last 4 years. It's undertaken research into systems leadership. We've had joint leadership development programmes, and we have put people into places to help people who are grappling with wicked issues, including in Essex and including in other parts of the east of England. People we've put into places are called enablers, and they're people who've usually worked at senior level in health or social care or local government, so they can call it. They're usually coaches, and they know a lot about leadership development and large-scale change. And their job is not to do a technical fix. Their job is to help build the leadership capacity of the people on the ground so that they can have the difficult conversations and do some real work. And we started out in 2013 with about 8 places, and we're now in about 60 across the country. And I've brought with, and I think they're in your packs, both the summary of the research that was done, which talks about systems leadership behaviours and qualities, and also some of the stories from places in this report. The revolution will be improvised too. Both worth a read, and I wanted to draw out just some of the sort of key pointers, firstly from the research. Oops. In the summary, on I think it's pages 6 and 7, they draw out sort of 6 key dimensions, 6 key behaviours of good systems leaders, what it's really like. If you can't face reading sort of 2 full pages, there is a summary on the back cover as well, but it really repays reading. I don't want to go through all of the values in detail, but I just wanted to draw out 2 or 3. First of all, it's fine to use your values. Not, this is my job, but actually, you know what, this is what I came here to do. This is what I really believe in. And your values can be a lodestar when it starts getting really complex and you don't know what to do. It's also about standing back a bit, getting off the dance floor and onto the balcony, just looking at what's happening. How am I feeling about this? How do I think they're feeling about this? What is actually going on here? And it's about behaving in ways that lead to change, particularly through using emotionally resonant stories and reframing for different groups of people. By stories, I don't mean fairy stories, I don't mean I met this bloke down a pub. I mean real stories based on data that can actually really change the way people think. It sounds terribly woolly and fluffy, it isn't. This is one of the most potent weapons in your armoury, and it's worth practicing narrative and getting your teams to do it as well. Just to show you how it works. Then 2015, proposals for reductions in tax credits. The Institute for Fiscal Studies wrote a report for MPs. Basically, would the national living wage compensate for this? Short answer, no. But done in very, very sober and mathematical language. So talking about household income distribution and talking about deciles, you know, very, very sober. Fast forward to Baroness Hollis in the House of Lords in October. Did she talk about deciles? Did she talk about household income distribution? No, she did not. She had a story about a family who would really suffer from this being imposed. And she had figures to back it up. And then she rammed the point home with a bolt gun. Think of the poor people getting the letters from the Chancellor at Christmas. The Christmas letters. Now, you do not need to go the full Tiny Tim on this. This is a really extreme example, but I use it to illustrate the difference that a really powerful story can make. And when you're trying to work with local councillors and MPs and politicians, it's a really useful tool to have in your armoury. So it's worth thinking about who in your teams might be a natural systems leaders. I mean, obviously people are flexible, everybody can adapt, but there are going to be some people who are better at this or more attuned to it, or it comes more comfortably with them than others. People who are good at building relationships, people who are good at empathizing, who are really committed to a place, who can live with a bit of uncertainty, who can live also with a bit of conflict without having a fit of the vapours. Most people can do some of this. But if you've got people who are absolutely wedded to program management, so today I'm going to do this, and this is going to happen, and tomorrow I'm going to do that, and that is going to happen, their heads are going to blow off when you ask them to try and do these things. It doesn't matter who it is in your team, what their level is, what their role is. Think about who your natural systems leaders might be and develop them and encourage them to do that. We know quite a bit from practice as well, from the pioneers that we're working with, including in Southend, from places in an initiative called Systems Leadership Local Vision, and latterly from the A&E places as well. First of all, patients, service users, absolutely at the centre from the start. We talk about what can the NHS do? What are the expectations here? If we want to build that dialogue, people are often very realistic. If you involve them from the start, you have much more chance of getting A, a more realistic answer, and B, sometimes a more surprising answer than the one you actually think. So don't just think like with STPs, we've got to get it perfect and then we'll send it out for consultation. Involve people right from the start. Relationships, absolutely the foundation. If you've got good relationships, you can weather the most humongous storms. If you haven't, you can have all the memoranda of understanding, all the documents you like, you won't get real change. No, you don't need to be best friends. Obviously it helps if you don't viscerally hate each other, but you don't need to be best mates. What you need is just enough respect that you can disagree and still keep talking. You can start small. Start from where you are and with what you have, and with kindred spirits, a coalition of the willing, people who think like you. And be willing to cede leadership as opposed to just trade it. Sometimes places and other sectors are just in a better position to lead on a bit, and don't feel you have to lead it all the time. So what do we know? Well, it doesn't always work. Lots of things can get in the way. Culture and history most often get in the way. If you've got a culture of toxic relationships and all that history, you're going to need to spend time on rebuilding them. We had one case where a community trust saw the acute trust as the enemy. It was their word. Suddenly they got somebody else in, somebody they could talk to and have a relationship with. Nothing else changed. The money didn't change, circumstances didn't change, nothing else changed, but they got some shared mental health wards, whereas before they spent 18 months talking about them and getting nowhere. It takes time and it feels messy, and especially when you're under pressure and you're getting assessed on a quarterly basis, it can feel really counterintuitive, and lots of things sort of, it's very easy to forget about it. And there comes a point where you put cards on the table, and at that point people often run away. So all these things can get in the way. One of the things to stop this happening is to have an internal enabler, somebody whose job it is to really keep people to the task here and remind people of the shared endeavour and the shared ambition. And see yourselves as central enablers, not as just people who are on the receiving end of some stricture from somewhere else. But that said, it can really work. These are just examples of places around the country that have really done things differently. Not to go into them in detail, but in Wakefield, the connecting care hubs mean that a referral that took a week now takes a day. In Adder and Worthing, they made real differences to the way people in crisis, in mental health services, both accessed treatment and got treatment on a much, much faster basis. It's helped with joining up the workforce in Leeds. They mapped where people working in health and social care both lived and worked, and the very act of doing that made them think differently. You know, we've got people living over here and working over here. Could we do this more sensibly? We've got people under threat of redundancy here, shortages over here. We could actually bring this together. You can also use this for data sharing as well. Most of the issues in data sharing are nothing to do with data or confidentiality. They are to do with the relationships between the people. There is also the Centre of Excellence for Information Sharing, incidentally. They will bring people to actually help you with this, and they would say exactly the same thing. So there are lots and lots of examples around the country of where this has worked, and people are really happy to share what they've done. So if you read the report and you think, actually, I'm really interested to know what they've done in Calderdale or in Wakefield, get in touch and I will put you in touch. This is not just me saying it, not to dwell on this, but there has been independent evaluation, and basically it shifts the way people think and therefore the way they behave, and therefore ultimately what happens on the ground in terms of services and outcomes. And so just to sum up this bit, what do I think this means for you? Well, first of all, I think see yourselves as systems leaders. Go beyond your traditional role. I thereby grant you permission to go beyond your traditional roles. Start with leadership behaviours and ground this in your values. This is what you are here to do. Start from where you are. Start with something small and real, and actually build the relationships and the coalition of the willing to do something about this. Recognise that it is going to take time, and it's going to feel messy and difficult, and that the system is not going to thank you for it some of the time. It's going to see you as a threat rather than a help. and sometimes stuff gets in the way. We'll talk about this more in the next session, but sometimes it just is the wrong time and the wrong place and the wrong people, and you shouldn't bang your head against the wall trying to get change. But that said, if you take the scenic route, if you allow for setbacks, if you keep going and you look for progress, it really is possible to get some real change in a place. And I would really just encourage you to see yourselves as system leaders and try things out. And in the next session, we'll talk a bit more about how you do this in practice. But I wondered if we might take 10 minutes again. Again, just to have a think now on your tables. Does this strike a chord? Why? If it's so, are you already doing this? I suspect you are in places. What are you learning? What's surprising you about it? Where else might you do this? Who else should know about this? You can take all or any or different questions, but I think the thing to do is just to have a little bit of reflection about this and see about what you're doing already and how you're already being a systems leader and what you might do next. So if you said 10 minutes for that. Ladies and gentlemen, can I bring us back for the final session, please? Thank you. We did open the doors, in the interim, just to get a bit more air into the room as well. But if it gets too cold or anything, then just say. Again, not to do sort of death by feedback, but if there are issues or ideas or thoughts that you had that you'd like to capture here about how this is resonating, what you're doing already, or what else you might do. It would be really good to hear them. Anybody want to start? We'll just think, no, I'll keep them to myself.
I've got the pen in my hand.
Yes, yes. Come on.
I think they are striking chords in our organisation. We're actually looking at, we're having to live in a lead provider framework for the last year. Surprising to say it hasn't gone as well before, but that's because the system leadership wasn't in place. And that's what I was referring to earlier, is about the no action, because you're trying to work out how to build the relationships and the trust in order to make that action happen.
Yeah. Yes. We sometimes say whatever gets in the way of the work is the work. So if you haven't got the relationships there, that's where to start.
I think the other thing also is the clarity around that framework and model, because if you haven't got that clarity, you can't start building that relationship and trust either.
No. I mean, you always have to sort of work through the niceties and the nuances of what something really means. But this goes back to the idea of shared ambition and shared endeavour, really being clear about what it is that you want to do, or even the subset of what you want to start with. Thank you. Anything else? What we'll do then, thank you, that's all we'll do, is say, okay, if this is the case, if we know a bit about more now about complexity, about systems leadership, about wicked issues, we know what works, what is likely to get in the way, what can I, as an individual, actually do? How do you make this work in practice? How do you even get started? And how do you think about frames that people are using and changing frames so that you can actually change the way that people see a particular issue and what might be possible? Biggest danger in any form of systems work is work avoidance. Now, everybody is working fantastically hard, possibly in some cases doing 2 or more jobs. So this is not about people not working. But I would like to throw a challenge out to you to say that if you are doing the wrong thing busily, which is quite common, then you and I and anyone doing that is really colluding with this work avoidance. There are lots of ways to avoid doing real work. You can define something as a technical issue rather than to do with relationships and try and apply a technical fix. You can say a problem doesn't exist when it actually does. You can shoot the messenger. This is very, very common. As soon as anybody says there's an actual problem, that's it. They're somehow magically removed. Or you can give the work to somebody who's not in a position to do anything about it. So you give the work to somebody too junior. You give it to a steering group that meets every 6 months. You call in McKinsey to do your thinking for you. Never ever use consultants to do your thinking for you or build your relationships. They are great at doing big number crunchy kind of things, big data analysis. They can be really helpful on technical issues, but for your own relationship building and strategic thinking, this is what you are absolutely placed to do. So always keep the focus on doing real work. And the way you do that as a systems leader, use your personal values. I talked about this. This is why I came to do the work that I'm doing. Getting on the balcony and understanding what your room for manoeuvre is, what your interventions might be that you might make. And I wanted to end by just talking about what I call Myron's maxims. So first of all, know your loyalties, know your trigger points. What would make you walk away? Would anything make you walk away? Would anything make your colleagues walk away? It's worth knowing what your walk away points are and what your values really are. And try and operate through those dimensions of systems leadership. How am I feeling? What am I thinking about this? What do I think others are thinking about this? How am I actually supporting other people? And what are the stories that I'm telling that actually help people see things in a different way? And choose your battles. You're not going to be able to win every battle. Sometimes, as I said, wrong time, wrong place, and wrong people. And you can spend an awful lot of time and energy and emotional energy trying to get change where it's not really going to happen. Only have a meeting if it is going to be useful, if it is going to change something. We all spend an awful lot of time in meetings. I spend a lot of time in A&E delivery boards and ancillary boards, and you get the people there who never say anything. Will just sit there. Sometimes they'll sit there like this, and sometimes they'll just glare at everybody else in the room, and sometimes they'll be there doing their emails, but by God, they're going to be there at that meeting just in case they might magically miss something. You can spend your entire life in these meetings. Please think, we've all got a finite amount of time, and we've all got things that we want to do. What is the best use of your time and of others' time? Do raise the temperature, disclose the threats, expose the conflict. Don't be frightened. Don't say, oh, we can't mention that because they don't agree. Actually say, we've got a disagreement here is actually much better and much healthier. And do challenge the norms. Why don't we just try something different? We can always go back to the same, but why don't we try something different? And pace to the wall. Myron Rogers has a lovely way of in describing working with living systems, and he has these lovely maxims. First of all, people own what they create, and real change takes place in real work. So by all means, give things to people at the front line, junior bandings, to try things out. They're the people who will often see things for what they are and have the ideas to do something really practical about them. So if people say, well, the leaders over there should be doing this, well, maybe they should, but whilst they're not, there's no reason to ask people, what can you do in your own time, in your own space? Are people familiar with Fab NHS Stuff, the Academy of Fab NHS Stuff at all? People heard of that? Right. When you get back, homework. Google Academy of Fab NHS Stuff. It's on Twitter as well. Loads and loads of ideas that people on the front line have created and have shared. It's an absolutely brilliant resource. Do use it and encourage your staff. I'll give you yes, the Academy of Fab NHS Stuff.
It says fabnhsstuff.net.
Thank you. Thank you. But do have a look at it. This is brought to life. It's people doing real change in real time, in real work. You don't need to solve everything. Start anywhere, but follow it everywhere. And keep building the connections. Keep connecting the system to itself. And I think this point at the bottom is really important. The process we use to get to the future determines the future we get. if we say we want change, but we do things in all the same ways, we're unlikely actually to get something very different. You'll just get, for example, one initiative following another. So it's worth really, really pinning these to the wall and trying to live them. Go where the energy is. Just create enough clarity for now. You don't need to solve or explain absolutely everything, just enough to get you started. Link up with people who think like you do and just start trying something out. And use framing and narratives to change the way people work and think. And at that stage, I want to go on to talk a little bit, just to give you a bit of background about framing, and then we'll close. So with framing. This is Leonard Rossiter, the late great Leonard Rossiter, as Reggie Perrin. Remember Reggie Perrin? Right. Reggie, in this picture, has just thought of his mother-in-law. What has he thought of? A hippo, yes, exactly. How long did it take you to think of that? Yes, but it's pretty immediate. That's because the hippo is a frame, a mental shortcut that we all used, internalized concepts and values that allow us to accord meaning. So, a hippo. So, the blockers, the enemy, those people over there who do things like that, the bad guys, the CCG, the Acute Trust, the Community Trust, NHS England, NHS Improvement. We all use these. They are based in metaphor and they affect the way we think and the way we make assumptions and the way people see us. This is not about intellect. This is about emotion. It's not about being rational. We all do it. So if you've got these frames, reframing is a great way to give yourself and others alternative options and alternative ways of working. Very difficult not to use frames. So don't think of an elephant. All think of elephants. It's like being on the motorway and you see one Eddie Stobart van and then you see 50 because you get primed to see them. The unfortunate thing about frames is that they are nothing to do with rationality or evidence. They will trump facts every time. Every time. So what often happens is, for example, sometimes you will go to a politician who sees things in a particular way and you will present evidence and the politician says, whatever. So you'll present more evidence, whatever. More evidence, I really don't care. It's because they're seeing things through a particular frame. So this is about framing in a different way so they will see things differently, rather than just getting upset because the evidence is there, why aren't they listening to the evidence? They're often about emotion as well, and deep-seated emotions and beliefs. Never underestimate just how much frames matter to people. I sometimes describe them as being like both prisms because they affect how people see things, unlike prisons because they actually act as cages. They stop your imagination working. They stop you hearing what's actually being said. So the thing to do is to see how you can reframe something. And although people think that frames are really strong, I sometimes describe them as actually quite brittle. Because once the frame changes, it suddenly very quickly becomes the new common sense. And we've always thought that way, haven't we? And it really matters. This is not a commentary one way or another on Brexit, but please note the line, when the facts met the myths, they were as useless as bullets bouncing off the bodies of aliens in an H.G. Wells novel. If you've established your frame, first of all, everybody else is reacting to that. No, this is not about one fiction versus another fiction. This is not about asking you to do something dishonest. It's about thinking how you establish your frame in the first place in a way that reflects the truth, but also enables people to actually see why it is truthful. The other thing to note, which is really, really annoying, is that the messenger is often the message. I'm taking this from John Major's recent speech on Brexit. On the one hand, he was making entirely rational points. You may agree or disagree, but he was making substantive points. Did people respond to those points? No, they did not. A craven and defeated speech of a bitter man. All ad hominem stuff. And it is the most annoying thing that I find. I can say something and, you know, you can just see it sort of bouncing off the walls and people not taking any notice of it at all. Somebody else can say it, exactly the same thing, and suddenly, oh yes, of course, we've always believed that. It's really, really annoying, but it happens. And sometimes, if you are the messenger getting in the way, it's as well to acknowledge it. It's not going to change. Can somebody else be your messenger for you? Which goes back to the idea of systems being complex. Who are your allies? Who are your coalition of the willing? Who might you engage with to actually give that self-same message? And I just wanted to leave you with this, which is a reframing exercise. Don't try and do it here, but it's really good to do with your teams. Basically, you work in threes. One of you presents your issue. You ascribe identities to two other people, and they feed back what the effect of the way you frame them is on the way they see you. It sounds really simple. It's surprisingly revealing. And when people start to get into it, some people find it really difficult to do. If you do, just notice that. Notice what it might be saying. But it's really worth doing. So I wanted just to end by saying, I think the thing to do is just to start. Start somewhere. Start with something small, something that you feel comfortable with. Go and build those alliances, build those relationships, those coalitions of the willing. Just go and have a coffee with somebody. It doesn't need to be a formal meeting. And just keep going and keep pushing those boundaries and keep using systems leadership for when you're in a really complex situation and you don't know fundamentally what to do, because this is what you use when you don't know what to do. I'm going to leave it there. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you very much for being attentive and thoughtful and really engaged. And I hope some of this has been useful. And thank you. Thank you.